have a Facebook page, so check out Intrinsic Motivation from a homie's perspective there. So we're everywhere, aren't we?
Yeah, that's right.
We're on Twitter. We have a Periscope.
Deal with it. We're everywhere.
We're on Instagram. Check us out on all of those. But you now seems like it's the bee's knees right now. So for those that don't know us, my name's Hamza again.
And I'm David.
And it's David. So we talk weekly about spiritual issues from a homie's perspective, just for the simple fact that there are a lot of spiritual communities out there. But in my opinion, they don't share the homie's perspective, or at least people that look like us. So we love the Hay Houses, the law of attraction, and things like that. But we wanted to give our take on it. Don't you agree?
Yep.
And David's background. David actually is a graduate of Berkeley Psychic Institute out on the West Coast, and I am a graduate of Horizon Center of Intuitive Awareness here in Atlanta, which his mother Joanne actually used to run. And so I graduated in 2011. You graduated before that.
I graduated in 1988.
Right. And so in our first podcast, if you look on our YouTube channel, we talked about our beginnings and such. We won't go into that just for brevity. But today we wanted to talk about near-death experiences. We haven't talked about that one before.
No, we haven't.
And what made me think of it was I just watched, we're big movie guys, so I just watched the movie Stasis. And for those that didn't see it, I'm actually going to include it in the description, both on the YouTube channel and our Facebook page, Intrinsic Motivation, again, by a homie's perspective. And in the movie, it was really interesting. There are a lot of movies out there talking about time travel and such, but this one took a different take on it. What happened was it was a teenage girl. She was about 15, 16 years old. She snuck out of the house to go meet her boyfriend, right? They're having a campfire. Everybody's watching, the fire and drinking, what have you. She takes some pills. She passes out. Her friends abandon her, right? And she wakes up and she goes home to go sneak back in the house. And she went to her bedroom to, sneak back in her room. And she's already in the bed. Right?
Wow.
Someone that looks like her is in the bed, so she's imposter. Like, what the F? What is going on? It's an imposter. So what happened was she actually, I don't want to give too much away, but enough for you guys to want to check it out, is she actually died, and someone in the future had taken her body. And in the previous podcast, we were talking about transmediumship and, people taking over your space. And I thought it was really interesting in the movie that they were talking about that. And the girl, what happened was she wasn't fully dead. Like, she didn't fully transition. So she was watching everything happen. Like, she was trying to get back in touch with her mom and, like, look, this is not me. And, her boyfriend comes around and it's like, you're not the same person. And in my opinion, that was a near-death experience because at the end, without giving it away, obviously it's a Hollywood-type movie, and she comes back. But I think that near-death experiences are more prevalent than people think.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, obviously, the only times you will hear about it when someone's willing to talk about it, but you got to imagine with, 7 billion people on the planet, it happens a lot.
So what's your definition of a near-death experience?
That's a good question. Never been asked that one. Well, maybe, getting close to the threshold and seeing and having experiences that you've never experienced before, and maybe the sensation of feeling that you've moved on or dead, and maybe you talk to an angel or something and then decide whatever to come back. I don't know. I've never experienced it, so it's kind of hard to come up with a definition, I guess, except for what other people have, talked about as far as what they've experienced.
Well, I think a different approach to it, everyone has a different definition, but there's a saying that when you die, you don't know that you died. Everybody else around you knows that you're gone.
Kind of like, what's that movie, the M. Night one with
Oh, yeah, The Sixth Sense.
Yeah, Sixth Sense, exactly.
Right. So there are a lot of instances where you go to another, you transition to another realm, but to everyone else, they notice your absence. You don't really know it until maybe something happens where, like in The Sixth Sense, they realize, oh, I am dead, or I've been dead for 100 years, or I've been dead for 1,000 years. Like, you have no idea, especially if you're earthbound.
And a lot of times they call those ghosts.
Right.
The people that have not transitioned and moved on because they don't really realize that yet.
Exactly. So I liken that to a near-death experience, not that specifically, but I like in a near-death experience where there's something like that, and you do have the opportunity to come back. So what's popular is you see somebody like, oh, I went down the long corridor and all the light happened and I spoke with the angels and they said your time's not ready, you're not ready yet, you need to go back to Earth, and then you come back and share that story. I think that's a traditional way of looking at a near-death experience, but I wanted to talk about it today because I think that there are a lot of different, if we look and change our definition of a near-death experience, we won't look at it with such awe, like, oh, I want this to happen to me. Yeah. Right, and I take that as Abraham always says that you shouldn't have to wait until the croaking experience, and they always say croak because they're trying to make light of the situation because we're just energy. And in the movie Stasis, they were talking about that as well. They were able to go into these bodies because the people had transitioned. So somebody else was either murdered or they committed suicide, and the people in the future were able to jump back into those bodies because that energy was no longer there. So they could use that as a vessel. So the traditional way, like that movie and others, is when you have that time travel, is they want to change things. So you have, obviously, since we live in the third dimension, there's a lot of duality of good and evil and such. And
what other movie did you just say? The Others?
The Others too, yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And with Stasis, in Stasis, you have good and evil, right? So you have the people that they want to change the world, and the people that want to keep the world the way it is. So you would have the way it is obviously dystopian times. There's a lot of nothing. It's just bleakness, fires, there's no unicorns, no sun. It's grim, right? And so they're like, well, we need to go back into the past so we can change that. So those that are familiar with the non-talk experience or other people on YouTube that have talked about time travel in the past, they always want to change some of it so that we can have a better today. And so they were able to go into this girl who actually, it was a overdose. That's how the teenager died. But they're trying to use her body so they can influence the past so that the present won't be as grim. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I thought that with that is a near-death experience where you look at, wow, I'm actually getting a second chance because we're taking for granted what's happening in our current state. Yeah. And usually it's that 4x4. I always say that spiritual 4x4. Most people, we had our hello moments. But when you have your hello moment, it's like, I've been living my life one way, and then this hello moment happens, which totally changes my life in a whole different direction. And I look at a near-death, if we were to use that near-death experience definition, the same rule would apply because most people that come back from that experience come back with a new lease on life.
Yeah.
From a homie's perspective, you have to look at 50 Cent. He got shot 9 times, which was a near-death experience, right? Kanye West was in a horrible accident. If those that remember, Through the Wire was one of his first songs where he fell asleep at the wheel. And then after that experience, he became the Kanye that we love, not the Kanye of today, but the Kanye that we love with his start. It was more of, I've had this experience, I've seen the other side, there's more than what we think is important today, and I'm here to tell you guys to live your life to the fullest and don't take it for granted.
What about the Shack?
What about it?
Wasn't that kind of like a near-death?
What was this Shack about? For the people that are watching the podcast.
Shack was a movie that recently came out, and this guy spends a weekend talking to God, kind of.
Okay, so
didn't you see it?
For those that haven't seen the movie, the guy actually he goes camping with his kids, and one of the children were kidnapped, and once that kid was murdered, he's in a bubble right now. He's having his awakening moment, if you will, his door-opening moment, where life just isn't worth living. And so he wants to go back to where she was actually taken, and on the way there, he gets into a huge accident. And when he's in that huge accident...
You don't know that till... Yeah.
Right, but once he gets into that accident, he's going out there, he goes into this he's had a near-death experience because he's in this horrible accident where he starts having communication with higher beings. So depending on your definition, it could be God, it could be his higher self, or what have you. And the story goes into a lot of him having forgiveness of what happened and living life from a different perspective because there was a lot of anger. And what I find for near-death experiences, there are a lot of instances, even I had gone recently on this past Friday to Paul Selig. Paul Selig is a popular channel, and he has a YouTube channel for those that don't know. And his near-death experience was his life. He just felt like it wasn't worth living anymore, you know. And then he had his near-death experience where 30 years later, he's this huge channel. He has this relationship with his higher self. And so you have these similar themes with the Paul Selig, with the movie The Shack, with Stasis. It's all around us, and the people are coming back and sharing their stories. But I really like how Abraham mentions that you don't have to go to that near-death experience to experience your higher self, right? Most people are living a life that probably doesn't serve them, or it serves them no longer. So at the Paul Selig thing on Friday, there were a lot of people asking questions like, I lived life one way where I didn't know anything about this, and now my life's turned upside down. And I want to go back to that, to my old life, which reminds me of The Matrix when the guy's eating the steak, or my personal experience when in the middle of Horizon and Joanne's like, that life is over. And you have this, even I remember one of the classes is you go through a death experience where you let all of that go. You let your past go, and you live in the present time. And I think that's my definition of not even having or surpassing that near-death experience. I think there's a popular belief that you can't really have a spirituality or a spiritual existence until you have a near-death experience.
Yeah, that's
right?
True.
So, you know, you have people that are testing those waters because they want to reach another level. And I'm here to tell you that that's not always the case. You don't have to do that.
So why do you think that, like, the circumstances of a person having an experience like that, a lot of times it can be like maybe they're having surgery or, you know, a car accident or something, but not everyone has this experience. So why do you think some people have it and others don't?
I think people have it because there's no other way that their guides, their angels can actually speak to them. So I like the movie. The other one I like to throw in there is Ghost Town, where you said there was a surgery and what have you. For those that hadn't seen that, he's a dentist, and he goes to get some work on himself, and he was actually dead for 7 minutes. And so he didn't, again, his awareness was he didn't know that he died. But at the hospital where he got his surgery, they knew he was dead. They had all the paperwork in case he wanted to come back and sue him, and they were ready. So he's walking back to his apartment in Manhattan, and he almost crossed paths with somebody. He goes, "Excuse me, sorry." And the person's like, "Whoa, he could see me." It was a discarnate spirit, right? And so, you know, that a lot of hilarity ensues. It's a romantic comedy. So I think that's the one-way word. You have that spiritual 4x4 where the angels can't, there's no other way that they're going to get you to pay attention.
They can pay attention and get you to wake up,
Right?
Yeah.
So a lot of people, if you ask them about their near-death experience, they were living a life totally different.
Yeah.
And now they're living a life that they were kind of reluctant to doing. Right? Okay. Even Paul Selig said that. He said even 30 years later.
Did he say
he's like, wow, I still question this, you know.
Did he say what his near-death was?
Yes, yes. So the question that most people have is, what is your experience with what is a personal experience with a near-death experience? Or what actually happens? And in my opinion, I think there are some similarities and some that are your individual experience. So the similarities, and I'll use Paul's example since that's fresh, is it was very quiet, like sublimely quiet, right? And he felt like time wasn't moving at all. And he was in a space where it was so quiet that that's when he started hearing his guides. And so there, you know, that's where his near-death experience came. He didn't have like a serious accident, but the time in his life, without giving away too much because it's his personal story, is you're feeling like there's nowhere else you can go. You've done everything that you can in your life, and with your free will, if you will, and then you have this near-death experience where you experience so much more than what you are used to. It just changes. I mean, how do you come back from a near-death experience, or near-life experience? Maybe I'll start saying near-life experience because you're actually living your true life, right? You're living your purpose, whereas before you weren't. You know, so I would look at it that way.
That's a good term. I like that. Near-life experience.
Exactly.
I've never experienced a near-death, but I've experienced far-death experience.
All right, well, talk about that. What do you mean by
Well,
far
I'm just
death?
kind of joking. Like, death was going on way over there, and I'm way over here, so I'm real far away from it.
So what death experience was happening that made you want to stay away from that?
I don't know, some fool's getting carjacked or something.
And you experienced it?
No. I'm just joking. I'm just playing on words. I'm saying where, the near death, I'm just saying that there was some death going on, but it was real far away from me, so that was a far death experience.
Gotcha. Okay. I got it. I'm slow. It's over my head. But one thing that I really like is kind of going to what I thought you were going to go into. What was really interesting, going through Horizon, you learned some very basic tools, and one of them is putting up your rows and protecting your space. And one thing that I thought was interesting was at the Paul Selig thing, you can tell that he's capable. And there are a lot of psychics in attendance, too. So you want to have your own space because everyone's reading each other's space. And so I could see him peeking into everyone's different space, which was interesting. And I had my rows up like I didn't want it. And he was like, oh, I see some people have, like, their middle fingers up like, no, stay out of my space. And I laughed, and I was like, yeah, okay. So I use that as a far-death experience because, I mean, with the levity that you had, like, you can witness some things, but if you're in a different energy, you're not going to allow that to happen to you. So if you may have seen a car jacking, right, but you were so far away there was nothing you could do about it, right? And you're like, well, if there's no accidents, I wanted to help that person, but I was like 20 feet away or, whatever happened, and I couldn't get there.
Yeah.
Right? So you may have a lot of people that have, especially, I mean, to talk about timeliness, we had that attack in London yesterday.
Yeah.
And so a couple of weeks ago in New York, you had the same terroristic attack, right, in New York, in Manhattan, where the guy takes his van and runs up on the street, on the sidewalk, and that's what happened in London. So you have people that I was 100 feet away, and there was nothing I could do. I wanted to intervene, and I just couldn't, right? And so you have to ask, well, why weren't you in that space? Or why were those people in that space to get hit? I mean, who are we to say?
Yeah.
So, and there's 3 people that died. There were 7 that are injured. So in London yesterday.
In
London. So of the 7 that were injured, would they have a near-death experience, or would they even share it?
Yeah.
Right. So there's a lot that you have, which is your personal story, but
I think there's more permission these days to talk about, what someone might say an otherworldly experience, as opposed to in years past, because a lot of times people might have been afraid. I'm afraid what people might think, but now it seems like people, if you have some kind of experience, they'll just, they're not afraid to talk about it as much. No, you don't.
No, I disagree. I mean, I agree on some level, but I think the reason why I would agree with it is because of the internet. And with the internet, you're able to connect with so many like-minded individuals where 20 years ago you weren't. So because you didn't have that immediate community that you could reach out to, you were probably more likely to keep to yourself. And so there's Facebook groups, there's YouNow groups, as you see. That's why we're on here today. There's Instagram groups, right, of people that have similar interests. And so they're sharing that story. So even for us to have an intrinsic motivation, we're obviously talking about subject matter that other people are talking about, but we're giving a homie's perspective on it. So we're sharing it in a way with like-minded people. So I still think there's a level of, and I think that's where Abraham says we're in a perfect world, right? You're not trying to change anybody, but if you feel that there's a level of comfort and support or a supportive group, you're more open to share your personal stories.
Yeah, and that's what I was saying, that there's people, it seems like they're more willing to talk about whatever it is that's kind of going on or what their experiences is than, maybe 30, 40 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And so a lot of people, when they have a near-death experience, they have a proof of life after death, or they think that, or they would say, this is what happened, and I knew it wasn't while I was living, so it was definitely on the death realm. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, the proof of it, you mean?
When people say, right, because if we speak to angels or we speak to guides, they're obviously not on our plane.
Yeah.
So we're only talking semantics here. There's semantics where people go through that near-death experience because they're not open to that communication.
Yeah.
Right? So is that what they're saying the death experience is, because they weren't paying attention? Because other people are paying attention and they actually can speak to their guides.
Yeah. Well, I think maybe every experience is going to be different, every individual. I mean, if you listen to them all, there's maybe some similarities, but they're not, obviously it's real to that person, And but you know what? I don't really care who you are. You can be as skeptical as you want to be, but I guarantee you there's at least one person in your life that you know that if they were to have that experience and they were to tell you about it, you would believe them. It's easy to blow off someone that you don't know. Mm-hmm. Someone says this, that, like, yeah, who's that person? I don't know. But, you know, and you could be completely skeptical, but there's at least one person in your circle, if they would have that experience and they were to tell you about it, you'd be all in. Mm-hmm. Because you know that person. You have history and whatnot. So it's easy to say, you know, yeah, okay, this really happened. Mm-hmm. So...
Well, one thing that I would like to talk about, because that's a perfect example of someone that's close to you. So from a homie's perspective, I always relate to hip-hop, right, because that's how I grew up, and it had a huge influence on my life. There are a lot of people, and like you said, with the web and having a lot of similarities with other people, it's really interesting, you know, 20, 30 years later, people that listened to hip-hop in the 80s and 90s, how they said it influenced their lives, whereas they stayed out of trouble, or they didn't go to jail because of it, and they knew the dangers of it, or they didn't have a number of children or illegitimate children because of the messages that were in the music back then. And when I was thinking about the subject matter, near-death experience, as it relates to that movie Stasis, I thought of I think it's an epidemic that people are talking about with drug use, right? So in the movie, the girl actually had an overdose. That's actually how she died, and you had the people in the future that were able to come into her body. And you hear that with alcohol a lot, where a person may black out, and if they're arrested, they were like, or not even arrested, they're just like, what happened last night? I don't know what happened.
Yeah, I have no clue.
Right? And so in 2017, with the veil being so thin, I think unbeknownst to us, we're allowing other energies to actually come in and influence your life. Right, and so I said it's pandemic or epidemic. I think it's a pandemic too, because the drug use is so prevalent now, especially in the music, that people are unknowingly allowing themselves to welcome other energies to come into their space.
Oh yeah.
So if they don't know what's going on, or they're not present in their mind, you're allowing other energies to come into you. And that is, in my opinion, a near-death experience.
Yeah, especially if the activities or whatever you're doing with this drug use or whatnot is low vibration type
Mm-hmm.
work or whatever, and that's just a perfect recipe for to, you know, get invaded or whatever, allow other type of energies into your space.
Yeah, if you think about like TV shows of Walking Dead and zombies, that's low energy, right? So if you have what's prevalent in the music now, and it could be just because I'm older, right? Like, I won't lie and say I didn't drink and all that when I was younger. When I was in my 20s, I did, right? But being older, you just have a different experience of looking at people in that light. And so you're just like, it just seems you're allowing these other energies to come in. And if you look at it as a near-death experience, I think that is, because if you're blacking out, you don't know what's going on, you're allowing lower energies to come into your space and influence you, because if without the drugs, you probably wouldn't have allowed that to happen.
Yeah.
Right? Or you wouldn't leave yourself open for it to happen.
Yeah. So I'm kind of looking forward to Michael Tamora, who we've mentioned. He was a teacher way back in the day at the BPI, and now he's doing his own thing. He does a lot of lecturing around the world. You know, he's a psychic healer, spiritualist. He's coming out with a book. I don't know when. I think he's working on it, but over the past decade, he's had I think 7 or 8 near-death experiences. What people might call, I don't know if at this point he's calling them that. Maybe the first time it happened, but where he's got right in the point where he's about ready to just completely check out, and for whatever reason, the angels or whatever are telling him, no, you're not done, so he comes back. But he's had this happen to him, I think, 7 or 8 occasions, so he's going to write a book. He's going to write a book about all those experiences.
Well, since you know him, let's talk about the first one, because for people that are having these near-death experience or an NDE, they're not planning on it, right? They've had, like we said, maybe an accident, or maybe they had a chemical influence, and as a result, they had a near-death experience. Whereas Michael Tamora, people that have the capabilities such as he does, he actually sought to go after it. So could you explain, you said 7 or 8, can you explain how he actually approached a near-death experience?
Well, I've been to a lecture, this is years ago, of him talking about, and at this point in time, I think he had only had maybe 2 or 3, and he was saying how each one of them were completely different, the experience. They weren't the same. I don't remember the first one. One of the ones I remember, he got to a point, and he was like, all right. He realized, he was out of the body, and he had, whatever heart thing was going on, and they were rushing him to the hospital, but he left his body, and I think he was ready to transition on, and a bunch of angels had showed up and talked to him and stuff, and told him that you still need to be on Earth. You're not ready to go. And I think he wanted to, but they told him, no, it's not time yet, and so they kind of pushed him back, urged him to come back. And then he did, obviously. And then, so then after that, he kept experiencing. But what I remember the most is he said each time it was completely different experience of how, one time he felt like it was a vacuum pulling right out of his body, and another time, it was just completely different. They weren't all the same whatsoever.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is some years ago, and so I'm trying to remember. I can't remember everything that he mentioned, but I do know that he had talked about he wanted to write a book because he kept having all these, and that was the book was going to be about all those different experiences of near death.
Okay, so you'll reach out to him, I'm sure, and find out like where he is, or maybe to share subject matter about that.
Yeah.
Right,
because he'd be a good guest. Yeah.
It sounds like the first time it was not unlike everyone else, right? They had a circumstance where this happened, and then they had that decision where they felt like maybe I should just transition, and then you have maybe your higher self or your guys that are saying, no, now is not the time.
Yeah.
And it reminds me of our contracts or commitments even when we incarnate. So my definition of that is you're sitting with maybe your family, your spiritual family before you incarnate in that Annie room, if you will, and you're having that meeting, and you're sitting around okay, these are the things that I want to accomplish in this incarnation. And obviously through the veil of forgetfulness, you forget all that when you actually incarnate. So when that circumstance happens and you're like, you know what, I'm just through with this life. And they're like, well, hold up a second. Remember this list of things that you wanted to accomplish? Mm-hmm. It's not time for you to go yet. You still have things that you want to do.
Yeah.
Because then it would go into the subject matter of reincarnation, because you're going to feel like these were unfulfilled, right? And now I still want to accomplish what I set out to do. And I think that's what happens with a near-death experience. It's near death. It's not a death experience. Obviously, if you accomplished everything that you wanted to do or set out to do, then there's no other reason to live, right? But if you're still living, obviously, you're not done yet. So if knowledge is infinite, it's really interesting because life is really funny, because we're living a life of, I want to go to school, get good grades, get a good job, or, a traditional linear life. And something like this happens, and it shakes up your world.
Yeah.
And it shakes up your near-life experience. Like, oh, this is what I really set out to do, and I need to spread this story because everyone is not present, and they're either thinking about what happened in the past or what's happening in the future. And you have no control over that. You only have control of the present.
Yeah.
And so that near-death experience is a reminder to live your life to the fullest, because maybe you're selling yourself short based off your current circumstance.
Yeah. And there's been, actually, it seems as of late, the past few years, there's been a lot of, well, not a lot, but there's been a number of movies like, did you see God Is For Real?
I did not.
Okay, that one, and then there's another one, what was the name of that movie? And I watched it recently with Jennifer Garner, where her daughter fell out of a tree.
I did see that.
Yeah. She had some situation. She fell out of a tree, and then she, talked to God or Jesus, and then he told her he healed her or whatever, and then she came back and she was fine. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And those were all both those movies are based off of true stories.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
One question that I saw on Quora that I thought was really interesting, and I think it's probably a theme, especially now in 2017, where in earlier times there was more of a religious stance on life, right? It was dictated to you being Christian or what have you. And now you have a growing number of people that even they don't believe in any of that at all. When you look at statistics, they're like, whoa, in 2017 is the lowest number of people that are into traditional religions. And so a question that was posed here on Quora was, has a near-death experience converted any atheist, right? And so Paul, I will talk about Paul in that aspect, because Paul Selig in his talk on Friday was talking about he was an atheist when he had his near-death experience, right? And so he was living life with a set of beliefs, and when he had that experience and had this communication 30 years later, he's like, I can't help but to have a different experience because it totally changed how I was looking at life. There's so much beyond my capabilities, even in 2017, that I am a better person because I allow that communication to come through me to not only help myself, but also help those that are around me or those that are actually stuck in what they're currently doing to help them go to the next level. So I'm seeing, in my personal experience, more and more atheists that are being, I wouldn't say converted, but they're having a different perspective based off of their near-death experience or their NDE. You know?
Interesting.
Another interesting thing, I think I mentioned this before, was Sylvia Brown. Sylvia is Sylvia Brown, right? Psychic? Yeah. So Sylvia, she passed away a couple of years ago, but she was an author, a noted author, and she had written a lot of books. And she had written a book about all the celebrities, because people always ask her, they ask about higher guides and higher self, but they also want to know, what happened to Michael Jackson, or what happened to all these people that transitioned. And one thing with regards to atheism, she had mentioned George Carlin, who was a known atheist. And when he had transitioned, he was just like, you got to be kidding me. Like, the joke was on him, and maybe it converted him afterwards, where he didn't have that near-life experience. He actually went back to the essence, and that's where his awareness was obviously broadened. But it's really cool, this third dimension, which is an illusion, where we're allowed to believe whatever we want to believe, but these NDEs are a awakening call or a wake-up call of putting us back on where we should achieve our life's path.
Yeah. And then, YouTube is full of videos of people talking about their NDEs or people that were, atheists, and their experience, that what brought them to the, believing in a source of it all, or God, or whatever. There's always interesting stories.
Now, another question that stuck out to me on Quora was, a person had a near-death experience, and now they were afraid to do anything. And they're like, well, what do I do now? And I think that, I don't think that's
Why were they
uncommon.
afraid? What do you mean, be afraid?
They were afraid because if that happened, it shocks you, right? To everyone that has a near-death experience, they don't just come out and they're Mother Teresa. Yeah. They're probably reliving that moment, or reliving that accident, or reliving that big moment that changed their life. So this person was probably scared of themselves, like, well, what do I do now? I think that question was probably posed as a person thinking of, like we mentioned earlier, in the 80s or 90s, where there wasn't this broad global community that you can reach out to and converse with, right? You felt like you're going through this alone. And for that person that I'm reading about it on Quora, I would think that that's when you get the biggest encouragement that you are not alone when that happens.
Well, it seems like a lot of people afterwards, like you said, they get a new lease on life, and they have no fear of death at that point in time.
Yes.
Because a lot of times they don't want to come back. They're like, man, I didn't want to come back. There was something, whatever they're experiencing was so great, but they ended up coming back. And after that, they have this whole inner chill, because they kind of like, okay, I know when it's all over, I'm going to experience what I experienced in my NDE, and all that fear is just, goes away, so to speak, to at least some degree.
Sure. So for that person that feels that way, I think that it will be short-lived, and I think that anyone seeing this that may have had that, maybe that's why you're watching this video now. Who knew how you were going to get it, but you were going to get it on some level. And I always find that out in life, where it taught me to actually take a step back, where I feel like, okay, I've tried everything that I could, and if I get out of my own way, then I can actually take it to the next level. because that reminds me of my friend Sarah. She was diagnosed with breast cancer a couple of years ago. So she, in essence, had an NDE. Like, she was looking at the end of her life. And when it went into remission, she came back, and, I mean, she's a firecracker now. I mean, she does everything. There's no fear in her mind of what she can achieve, and I think it was because of that NDE.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, for a lot of people, they have to go through that. You know, like you mentioned before, I don't believe any of this until it happened to, you know, the homie down the street. And now I believe it.
Yeah.
Right? So I think what we're trying to say is, you know, you're going to get it how you're going to get it. So I don't think, and it's no wrong way. Watch what you ask for, because it'll definitely happen.
Interesting.
But I really like, again, honing in the part with the whole Abraham thing of, you shouldn't have to, they said that, you don't have to wait to the death experience or the near-death experience to appreciate and get all that life has to offer.
Yeah.
You know, and those NDEs are a wake-up for a lot of people that feel that maybe they don't have that connection to a broader intelligence.
Now, you personally, do you have a fear of dying?
I do not. No, I'm an adrenaline junkie.
Okay.
So for me being an adrenaline junkie, I've done everything from whitewater rafting in West Virginia, which is like some of the top places in the country to whitewater raft. You know, highly dangerous to some people, but to me, I just did it. I've done hang gliding. I've done skydiving, swimming with sharks.
Hang gliding? Wow, you've done that one?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And it was really, you know what was really interesting about that? I'm glad you brought up the hang gliding.
Solo, or was someone with you, like, attached to you?
No, whenever you do the first ones, you have to do a tandem.
Oh, okay.
You have to, just for litigation. For any smart company, they better not let a person just
But
go
you have
done
it by yourself, too, after the
I
tandem?
have not, no.
So it was just that first time?
Yes.
Tandem, okay.
Yeah, it was like there's no, for me, I mean, it satisfied a need for me.
Yeah, okay.
But what's interesting for you to ask that question as it relates to a near-death experience, we're here in Atlanta, so I'm going to share this for people that live in the Southeast. There is a huge hang gliding place in Tennessee where you go hang gliding, right? It's beautiful, especially in the fall. You know, the leaves are changing. It's very scenic, right? And so when they first started, I mean, when we first got there, we had to go up this huge hill. It was like 3 miles in the air, right? And so you can imagine, you're 3 miles or really high because you have to get a lot of height to go hang gliding, right? Yeah. And what happened was we had to go up there just to sign up. And then we came back down to the street. And we're like, wow, why did that happen? Well, this company's been around for, I want to say, 30 years. Mm-hmm. And when they first started, people ran off the mountain and then did the hang gliding. But there was so much fear associated with it for a lot of people, for a number of people. Mm-hmm. There were a lot of injuries for people like, yeah, I'm going to do it. And then as soon as they got close to the cliff, they had second thoughts and they'd break limbs and all this other stuff.
So they want to get you up there, let you kind of experience being way up there.
Before. And so what they do now, which is really cool, I think, is just to go through the whole experience, and maybe I'll do it again, or maybe we'll get a group to go, because I know you're not going to go, but for people that are watching this, and I know I was actually in a business meeting a week ago, we were talking about hang gliding, but back at this place in Tennessee, what they do is you have you're on the ground with this motorized vehicle. There's 2 motorized vehicles, right? And so you're attached, and what happens is they both go up in the air. You're up like, I don't know, 10,000 feet or what have you, and then what happens is the cord is cut. So once that cord is cut, that one plane, goes off, and then you're just sitting there in the air, and you're just like, whoa, you're hang gliding, like it's really happening, and you're cutting that cord. And in life, in spirituality, you can never cut that golden cord, right? You're never taking away from spirit ever, right? If we're all connected through some cord, right? And even in spirituality, we're taught of grounding, like put it down the grounding cord, right? Yeah. So spiritually, there's no way you could break from that cord. But going through that hang gliding experience is a good reminder of, does it feel like I'm away from that cord? No, not really. You have that tandem person that's with you. They're actually showing you around. And for that near-death experience, they're actually showing you around. So in the shack, it felt like he was dead for a weekend, right? He could have been out for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, but since there's no time out of third dimension, you have no idea of what you have to actually uncover, right? So it's what you're working through. And, when I first got here this morning, you're like, whoa, I've been sleeping so much. And a lot of us, we talked about hypersleep a couple podcasts in the past. I think that's an NDE too, because we're not in that third dimension. You're having communication with your guides. You're probably sleeping more because they're downloading information to you, which is not unlike a person going through an NDE. Right? So that's why I want to take away the mysticism of a near-death experience.
I don't know if a hypersleep, I mean, I get what you're saying. In one sense, you're either way, you're out of the body, and so you're experiencing what you're experiencing. It just seems like a hypersleep is just more intentional, whereas a near-death is something you don't even see coming.
Well, I think that's where you talking to Michael Tamura coming through, because he's had 7 or 8, right, where the first one it sounds like it was a heart attack. So for anyone else, is like you mentioned, it was not intentional. Whereas this person obviously has had multiple ones, so there has to have been some type of intention to have an experience. And as you mentioned, they're always different. So I would say for people that have, some people go to bed with an intention. Some people go to bed with, hey, I want to remember my dreams. I want to have communication with my guides, and right, you go with this intention. Whereas some people they just fall asleep as soon as they hit the pillow. They have, right, there's no intention whatsoever, so they're like, I can't remember my dreams. I don't know what's happening. It doesn't happen to me. It happens to everyone else because you didn't set that intention. So I think when you have that hypersleep, I would argue you have that intention of having that communication and getting some downloads and probably learning information you wouldn't have learned during the waking state.
So of all your adrenaline junkie endeavors, which one was the most like, wow, that was the most intense, the most adrenaline-driven?
I think they're all the same because the theme is the same. And I heard this before. I heard this with someone said, like, the 2 moments that you feel most alive is
to death.
Right. If you're in war or if you're having sex, right? You're in the present moment, and there's nothing else you should be thinking about, right? Because you're thinking about something else, you could die, or you're not having a good experience with your partner. And so when you have these adrenaline experiences, or even surfing, you have to pay attention when that wave comes through so you can jump on it, right? So I think they're all the same because it forced me to become present. Right, I can't think of anything else. I have to be
right there,
fully immersed. And you see this even, shout out to Tiger because, people have been making fun of him. But I watched a podcast earlier this week, and a person had mentioned that he's probably just lost in a way. Like, I think my prayers go out, well, I don't think, my prayers go out to him and people like him because athletes, they go through, I think, a near-death experience in that they're so used to being present when they're doing their thing, right? They're the top football player, the top golf, whatever, and they're awesome. But when, they grow older or they get injured and they can no longer do that, they're like, what is my life for? I have no life worth living.
They're so engaged in that one,
Right. So even Tiger, in a sense, he mentioned, I don't know, but they mentioned that he had that DUI, but he didn't have any alcohol in his system. It was all medicine.
For sure.
So he was trying to drive. So in essence, he's trying to he's probably going to go to this next plateau that he's unprepared for, and that's how he's going to do it because there's no intention, right? So he may unintentionally, like most people, have a near-death experience. I mean, the tires were flat, and the car was obviously in the key was definitely in the ignition. So that's why
he was sleeping, right? Wasn't he?
Right, you're asleep at the wheel,
and just slept.
But isn't that the same story of Kanye? Kanye was working so hard in the studio, like 16 to 20-hour days. He's trying to drive home that night, and he fell asleep at the wheel, and he had that near-death experience. And so that's where the universe is saying, hey, you're doing things on your power, but there's so much more that you have to accomplish or that you can accomplish if you get out of your own way. So I would say they would kind of go together, right? Or anyone else going through these near-death experiences, you have to, there's things on the surface that you look at, but there's also always underlying themes that are happening, and that's their personal experience, but I think the themes are still the same.
So what would you call, let's say, for example, well, this is not an example, this actually happened. It was one of those, this is, I think, back in the 80s, and it was a flight that was coming from either going to Hawaii or had just left Hawaii, and I think it was going to Hawaii, and there was a person who was on the plane, and all of a sudden, a voice tells him, put your seatbelt in. You're about to go for the ride of your life. And they put their seatbelt on, and right after that, the cabin blew. There's an explosion. Big old hole. A few people flew out, obviously. And, the plane was whatever. They were able to land it. Obviously, people lost their lives, but this person obviously didn't. But Spirit told them, hey, buckle up, because this is about to... So obviously they knew what was going to happen before it happened. I guess that's not really a near death.
It is, in essence. It is, because I would go back to the drug use that's happening with the younger cultures, right? And I think every culture goes through that, or in America at least, right? And what happens is, I remember Andre 3000 said that. He was like, no drinking so I could hear the angels clear. That example that you had given, there's countless people that maybe have NDEs or near-death experiences because they refuse to listen to that, right? There have been countless incidents where there was a shootout or something, and everyone's connected to Source, right? So everyone's getting messages of, hey, you know what, you shouldn't be here, or you need to leave, and they ignore it, or they're probably imbibed, so they ignore it as just the same, and then this incident happens. So in that plane experience that you had given, if they didn't listen, they would have gone too, right? So the same thing with that. There's a popular story of that big flood. I think it was the resurgence happened with Katrina, where the guy had died. He was on his roof, and he was like, yo, God, how come you didn't save me? And he was like, yo, I sent you a boat. The boat came through, and you were like, nah, God's got me. I'm good. And the plane came. He's like, I said, what else you want me to do? Right?
He wasn't recognizing the how the foreman was coming for the help that he was asking for.
Exactly.
He thought it was going to be like,
So maybe that is the NDE.
The clouds partying and...
The NDE is totally not being in touch with Source. Right? And so I think that's the reminder. There's another question on Quora, are near-death experiences similar to enlightenment, right? It's like, whoa, are you going to be like Shakespearean afterwards? And people are like, you totally changed, or not? But it's a wake-up call of, hey, I lived life up until this moment, and I had exposure to something that I was unaware of. And now I just have a different lease on life.
That's what it's all about. You have to change. And it's like, how do you not change when you have an experience that is just can be so profound? I don't see how you not change.
well, there's other people that mentioned they're scared to even leave the house or do anything, right, because of that experience. So I think ultimately, right, there's grace. And I think grace is one of the best things that's bestowed on the human race, because it left up to our own devices. That's why we have all those silly videos we watch on YouTube and Instagram of, people falling down a flight of stairs and all these other things and living, right? There's something that's keeping them around or keeping us around, no matter how much we may think, or I think that we should be thankful. I think when we're thankful of those things.
Well, what about the guy that was during 9/11 who was like on the 86th floor when it collapsed or whatever, and he survived that? Can you imagine that whole thing collapsing, and he's in the mix of that somewhere, and he ended up surviving? That's like unreal.
Well, I think the last one I'd like to talk about is a near-death experience is actually seeing someone transition. So, there's instances where it could be violent, where you might see somebody get shot, but then everyone says that they saw that soul leave its body, right? Or if you saw an elderly person in the hospital and you saw like their guide come around, and you saw, okay, now they're letting them know it's okay and they can let go, and seeing that happen. I think those are near-death experiences too, because you're experiencing that from someone else. You're seeing them transition onto something else, whereas it doesn't necessarily have to happen to you, but I still think that's a near-life experience because that is something you witnessed, right? So I would also look at that as a near-life experience because of that phenomenon. Right. So that's why, for me personally, I don't like going to hospitals, because when I go to hospitals, there's a lot of discarnate energy there. Right. There's a lot of resentment. Like, I shouldn't have died. There's people that have transition, like we talked about, earthbound, and they're still walking around the hospital placing blame on people, and it's just like
pissed off, and
they're pissed off, and they see you, and you see them, and they're just like they're attracted to that light. And not that I'm the biggest enlightened person. I'm just speaking from personal experience. I would consider that a near-life experience too, as a reminder. Because I think if I wasn't on that energetic level, I wouldn't have seen them. So maybe that's a reminder of me. Because maybe at that time I'm thinking I'm having a shitty day, and it can't be any worse than this or whatever. And I'm getting that experience. Let me know it could be a lot worse, or it could be a lot better if I just let go. So those incarnate spirits need to let go. But in those NDEs, some people, like you said, Mike Tomorrow, are trying to let go, and your guides are like, look, you haven't fulfilled everything that you set out to fulfill, so now it's time to come back. Right? So I think from that, time's always on our side.
And plus, being as a clairvoyant and a psychic and being able to see energy and for me, that helps the whole everything, just having that kind of awareness, because, I have no fear of, I understand what transitioning is about on some level. I'm not the full level, because I don't think we know everything. We don't know everything. But, getting out of your body and whatnot, and awareness of myself as spirit. So I have no fear of dying. Zero.
I think that's a good way to close it out. It's more of fear usually exists. It's false evidence appearing real, and it's fear of the unknown. So because it's unknown, it gives people a lot of fear. And I think we're all subject to that, right? It's just fear of the unknown. There's fear of having a president that doesn't have any political ties whatsoever who now runs the country. There's a lot of fear happening now, right? But if there's no accidents, that could be a near-death experience. The country's going through a near-death experience as a whole, but if this person wasn't, it is, right? Life is perspective. So this person's a president for a reason, and it's probably an awakening experience.
Countries were having a
near-death experience, and you're just like, wow, we are so much better because of that, right? Like, look at Germany after World War II. It's so much better now because of that, right? And there's a lot of pain there, and there's a lot of pain here in the States too. But if we look at it from that perspective, it is a near-death experience. So sometimes you could welcome it, right? It just so happens that we're going through it right now. So you're like, how can I welcome it? God damn it, and blah, 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 blah. And now we're in the moment of fear, right, because of the unknown. So I like to leave it on that because we don't like to talk about politics, but just had to throw that perspective in there. So as closing and for commercial sake, thanks for the people that are watching us now on younow.com. For those that are unfamiliar with the platform, definitely check it out.
Thank you.
It's growing. It's huge. We'll probably do some more podcasts on this platform, see how it goes. We will definitely upload this on the YouTube channel, on our Facebook page, so on and so forth. I did want to take a moment out to talk about our Patreon page. We do have a Patreon page now. That's patreon.com/intrinsic motivation. We're actually in the process of getting together to go to Peru. We're looking at doing an ayahuasca retreat sometime in early November, and would love our patrons to go there and send us support for that. Definitely check out the channel. We'll have some goodies on there that we're not going to put on other channels. We're actually looking at having our sponsors that are on Patreon giving back and actually doing some exclusive videos when we go to Peru for that. So check us out on that channel. You'll see, be a part of that community. We'd love to continue to put out some good content for you guys from a homie's perspective. And definitely see us on the other channels. Please subscribe, leave comments below of different content that you want us to talk about. We're really excited about some upcoming podcasts. We have some really good guests that are coming on. And if you have some different subjects that you want us to talk about, go to our Patreon page. We're obviously giving some higher levels of consideration for those people that are contributing to our page of different subject matter. So anything you'd like to add in going out?
No, I think you said it all.
Yeah, and with that, please, again, check out our subscribe to our channels on YouTube, Facebook, and so on. And until next time, we'll see you later.
Have a great day.
Peace.